Okay, everybody. So the last time that we met, we talked about test number 1, and we talked about Augustine, right, in the medieval period, right? Good. So, stopping last Thursday with what we did last Thursday, that is the last of it for what's on your first exam. Okay? So from the first day to last Thursday, that's what's on the exam. Today we're starting a new exam period. Everybody cool with that? Okay. And it might seem kind of weird that we're starting at where we are, but there's a significant amount of time between Augustine and Christine de Pizan. Now, it doesn't always feel like that because they both were during the Dark Ages, technically. The Renaissances hadn't really started when Christine was there, but there is some debate that could happen on whether she's considered medieval or early Renaissance. And some people would say, well, women only really started to read and write during the Renaissance, and that was not true. There were women who were in high positions or close to high positions of authority who were taught to read and write. They just were very, very few. Or maybe they were taught to read but not to write, for example. So there were a few. None of them were speaking in public. And we get an explanation of this, or at least a contemplation of it, from Christine when we get into her actual work that you all read, which I think amounts to about 1,000 words. I mean, it seemed like the shortest reading I've ever given y'all, like in an excerpt from somebody, all right? It was pretty short. And you're probably wondering, what the heck was this for? And I don't blame you. I would be asking myself that same question. They took an excerpt out of context and just threw it in there. And I'm like, what is this? Like, the whole book is what matters. I'm not suggesting you guys read both books. I'm just saying they could have done a little bit more. You know what I mean? So I'm not really sure that the reading excerpt that you have completes the argument that Christine's trying to make. So I'm going to go ahead and talk about that. So Christine de Pizan was raised by basically a physician, and he was a physician to the king, her father. Her mother wasn't around for most of her life. Her father was around until her early 20s, which would have been considered a pretty good life at that point. But once he died, it was after Christine had married, but her husband then died. So Christine was left with 3 children of her own, and a niece, and her mother, all living together with no source of income, no older male to take care of them. And so Christine decided she had to figure out a way to take care of her children, her mother, and her niece. So the first thing that she started doing, because she was raised by her father in essentially a castle, she was essentially raised and taught by the same people who taught the king's children. So she had a very good education, and her father was extremely well educated, so he exposed her to culture and to reading and writing as well. Christine was one of the few women who was able to write eloquently during the time. And in fact, the excerpt that you read is her recalling a conversation that she's having. It's not, here I learned this from these books, it's, I had this conversation. Here's why that conversation is important. So Christine de Pizan did not start out as a rhetorical theorist or as a rhetorician. She did not speak in public. But what she did do was start by selling what they used to call favors. That it would say, for example, a poem that a knight might give to a princess, right? Like, some of you have seen A Knight's Tale, right? Like, you would pay someone, the knights would pay people to write a letter or a poem or a lyric or something for the person that they were in love with so that they could present that to them. Christine was able to write good poetry good letters. She wrote eloquently. She wrote at the level of what would be considered a courtier in the high courts, the king's court. So she wrote at that level that the knights needed, and she probably came fairly cheap because men could charge a heck of a lot more than women could, right? So she made a living by selling these little poems, and then she decided it might be a good idea to actually produce a book. And she wanted that book to guide literally females, literally women, guide women in how they might be able to move through society. So she addressed her work. The version you have is a little tampered down, okay? In the original editions that I've read, the original translations that I've read, Christine de Pizan addresses all of her work to the princesses in the treasury of the City of Ladies. She addresses it to princesses specifically because the princesses could influence the princes and the kings if they knew how to appropriately speak to their husbands or their partners or their brothers and so on. So she was trying to teach women how to speak to people in positions of authority, particularly men, in order to persuade them to do what might be considered the right thing, the better thing, to stay out of wars, to enter a war, I guess, in some cases, but to advise them in the best way possible. So that's why she says to the princesses. She is not writing this work for the general population. This is not for people who are below her station or below her class. This is only for people in the upper echelons, the courtiers and the like. So it's not just the official term princesses. It's queens, princesses, courtiers. Those would all be considered princesses in this idea. So she's writing above her station, and people accepted this. So the question is, what did she say? I cannot reiterate both books to you. I just can't. Some people called, particularly the City of Ladies, the book of the City of Ladies, a lot of people called that an etiquette book. Sort of, you guys probably don't read etiquette books anymore, right? Emily Post kind of stuff. Nope, no idea what I'm talking about. Okay, there used to be these thick books that my mother had one, my grandmother had one, that would tell you all the rules of etiquette for you. Rules that became norms in society in the mid 20th century, really. For example, my mother called me literally the other day, and she goes, I just got a thank you note from Rachel. And I said, which Rachel? Your daughter-in-law or our cousin? She said, cousin Rachel. I said, okay, well that's nice. She goes, it was for the kids' birthday presents. And I said, okay, I mean, they've got small ones, so it's nice to give them birthday presents. And they're both born within the same 3-week period before Christmas and after Thanksgiving. So they always hold one party for both of them, boy and a girl. She goes, it is February. And I said, so? She goes, that party was in early December. And she was just so offended that this thank you card, I'm like, first of all, you got a thank you card. I did not. Second of all, what's wrong? I don't understand. Well, Emily Post would tell you that you should write a thank you note within 2 weeks of receiving a gift. Now think about that. For weddings, all of your thank you cards out within 2 weeks after your wedding. Are you kidding me? I'm still on a honeymoon. I'm just saying, like, if you do it right. Seriously? Like, my sister-in-law was like, yeah, I was writing thank you cards on my honeymoon. I'm like, okay, glad we got rid of that rule, right, or regulation, although apparently for my mother, we did not, right? That you're supposed to send invitations to a party out at least 2 weeks in advance, and you always ask for an RSVP. Okay? These are here's where the fork and the knife and the spoon go, right? I told you guys I've been watching Dexter a lot lately, and yesterday I was watching an episode where a little boy said to his aunt, who's in her late 20s, says, hey, which one goes on the outside, the fork or the spoon? And she goes, surprise us, right? Like the idea is that we don't follow these rules of etiquette anymore. That's what this first book, the Book of the City of Ladies, was considered. So we don't normally spend a whole lot of time talking about that one. You might if you study literature, but not in our case. In our case, we focus on the treasury of the City of Ladies. What is it that women hold that is of value? That is the question. What is it that women hold that is of value in the medieval period? And of course, again, not everybody could read and write. This was advice for the upper echelons. So Christine says the first thing and the most important thing that a woman has, I know it's going to shock you, hope you're sitting down, is your virginity. Now, in your book, it says reputation. Okay, I guess that makes sense because for a good amount of time, between the time that Christine was around, so around the 14th century, all the way through to the 20th century, the idea of having a good reputation meant that you were virginal. I'm sorry, for women. Right? Have you guys ever heard this before, like the famous trope? That if you're a good girl, otherwise you're called names, and people think of you poorly if you have sex with anybody, and if you're in a horror film and you're blonde and you have sex, you're gonna die. Usually the first one to die. Have you guys ever heard this before? One of you has, okay. Yeah. I don't know about everybody else is like, what? What are these rules you're like? It's a trope of a bygone era, thank God. So the idea that you would retain your reputation by retaining your purity, your virginity. In other words, that you would stay clean. Now, this can be interpreted a bunch of different ways. Yes, Christine was not going around having sex, but she wasn't really talking about that. She was more talking about not putting your stuff out for the public to see. For example, if you're ill-tempered, like you've got a bad temper, you don't let anyone see that. That's something you keep in your bedroom to yourself or between you and your mom or whatever, right? If you have some, I don't know, embarrassing part of your body or an embarrassing habit, or you have a lisp, or you couldn't speak right, or you had a stutter, any of these things were considered defects. You would keep them to yourself and overcome them before you would present yourself to public, right? So what she's saying is not necessarily about whether or not you're hymenated or not in the case of women. It would be more, did you keep your reputation where it needed to be at the level that you're at? Now, surely you all have seen some movies that have demonstrated this. One of my favorites is Titanic. You've heard of it? I know you weren't born yet when it came out, right? Or whatever, or you too, or whatever. But because it came out in 97 or 98. So,
I think it was 98.
Yeah? Were you alive then?
No, but my mom saw it when she was pregnant with my sister, and it was very emotional.
I'll bet, yeah. It was an emotional experience, although as I went with a bunch of my friends from grad school, and we were all sitting in this row, there were like 7 or 8 of us, because going to the movies back then was kind of our entertainment. So we either bowling or movies, so we did that to de-stress. And so we're all like, okay, we're going to go see Titanic, and we all sat down in a row, and everybody goes, we do know how this ends, right? We know how this ends? And I was like, yes, we do. We know how this ends. We're just going to watch the process of it happen, and we know the ending. The scenes, have all of you seen Titanic, or just, yeah? Have you seen it? Yeah? Okay. All right, so the scene in the dining room where Rose has to put the napkin on her lap just right, and she turns and she looks at this little girl who has the white gloves on, and she's learning how to set down her napkin, that everything had to be perfect, that you cinched up your body so that you looked thinner than you were. You know what, really, we've come full circle. I mean, I know some people wear Spanx, Adele talks about it all the time. How's that any different from a corset? Just sucks you in. I don't really know. I'm just saying. So that, some of our standards have not changed. Beauty standards are something that change all the time, it seems like. And they're definitely changing for the better now. Now, it's okay if you're too thin. Now it's okay if you're too big. It's all good, right? Whereas back in the mid-19th or mid-20th century, and certainly at the time of Christine, it would have been a little different. When Christine was alive, women who were a little bit more buxom and hippie were more likely to survive childbirth and therefore were more desirable. Also, if they had the money to get fat, then that meant they were well off, right? So that was a standard, right? In the in the 1980s, so late 20th century, your job was to be 60s to 90s. Your job was to be as thin as a hanger. Your clothes should look like they look on the hanger when they're on your body. And this is how we ended up with Twiggy, who was before my time, but Kate Moss, who was incredibly thin. The running joke was that if a strong wind came by, it would blow her right out of the window. And I mean, a lot of women that were just tiny to the point that they looked like they were too young to be on a runway, and they were definitely too tiny to be representative of the rest of the world. A movement started in the late 1990s to show women bigger and fuller. So there's a, I don't know, is it still a thing, The Body Shop? Is that still a thing? Have you guys ever heard of The Body Shop? They sell like perfumes and soaps and stuff. Maybe it went out. Oh, you've heard of it? Okay. I thought there was one in the mall, but I haven't been in the mall in like 5 years, so who knows. But they started running bulletin board ads in the late 90s in California with size 14 models on them. And there were people who were saying, you need to take that down. Women don't look like that. That's disgusting. I'm like, 14, right? Like, the average size for a woman was 14 at that time. I don't know what it is now, but that's what it was. And so, like, I'm just saying to myself, so what size are you supposed to be? Like, if you can't be the average size, what size are you supposed to be? Right? Very frustrating. But obviously, that was the first in a series of corporations and corporate sponsorships that started towards a better body movement. It took a while, but Dove picked up on this, right, eventually. And now I see commercials and I'm like, dude, why am I looking at that, right? And then I'm like, oh, wait a minute, that's probably what I look like, right? Like, and I'm like, I don't think I would ever go on TV though, right? And what Christine would say is that, I have a more modernized phrase for it, dress the part, be the part. If you're a bigger girl, dress like a bigger girl. That's totally okay. You don't have to, now, all props to Lizzo, right? And no body shaming ever. I know that this hasn't completely got out of our system yet because my stepdaughter, who was 13 at the time, her mother is like, literally, her mother is not 5 feet tall, and neither is my stepdaughter. She's 4'11". If she could have been 4'10", we could have gotten a free car out of it, because then she would get counted as a little person, but whatever, it's fine. And she's all hair, and her mother is like all hair, only my stepdaughter has beautiful hair, her mother not so much. Her mother is on the larger side, a little rotund, myself included in this, by the way. She's smaller than me, but she's rotundish, bigger than a 14, let's put it that way. But, not by much probably, but my stepdaughter was raised by her mother with this horrible attitude about bodies, horrible attitude, that you should always be hiding, that you should never be okay with it. So I take her out to New Jersey to go to the beach. Now, I'll be honest with you, don't like being in a swimsuit, okay? Especially at my age, plus my size, right? Not a fan, but I do it. Because when you go to New Jersey, you go there to be in the freaking water. That's why there's zero reasons to go to New Jersey except go to a beach. Okay, that's it. That's the only reason to go. Or the boardwalk and get pizza. Point is, we get to the, I'm all excited. We get to the hotel, and I like put on my swimsuit, and I put on this big frickin' floppy sundress that I had, and sandals, and I'm like, let's go. Now, I'm technically not allowed to go in the water, but I couldn't wait to get down there and stick my feet in, right? So I said to my daughter, we got there in the evening, I said, okay, let's go. She's like, no, I'm staying in a hotel room. And I'm like, but me and Dad are gonna eat on the boardwalk. We're gonna get like pizza and French fries, and then maybe a waffle ice cream sundae cone thing that they have. It's literally 2 waffles with ice cream between it, I'm not kidding. And she's like, no, I'll stay here. Okay, she stayed in a dark hotel room facing the pool, and did not open the drapes, and we told her to keep the door locked, and we left, and went down and walked on the beach, went and got our pizza, really had a good night, get back, and I said, tomorrow, you are going to the beach with me and her father, and I'm gonna pay $30 for the 3 of us to go onto this beach, and that's it, that's what we're doing. And so I made them get up and go to the beach with me. Middle of the day, I paid $30 for the 3 of us to get on the beach, knowing I can't go in the water, not knowing what these 2 are gonna do, because the last time my husband was on a beach was when he was 8, and he hated it so much he remembers it at 50. So I was like, I don't know what's gonna happen when we get down here. Well, my husband was a lifeguard. So he was fine with it, although learning that the ocean is different from the pool was another life lesson, right? And if you've ever swum in the ocean, you know what I'm talking about. It's very dangerous, very difficult. And so my stepdaughter, she looks at me, she goes, Elizabeth, I'm uncomfortable. And I said, why? What's wrong? And she goes, all these people are half naked. I'm like, wait, we're not on a naked beach. And she goes, no, I mean, like, they're all walking around in, like, bikinis and shorts. And I'm like, yeah, we're at the beach. People wear their swimsuits around. This is what we do. Like, I got this floofy sundress on. I'm taking it off. Here's my bathing suit, right? And she goes, okay. And I said, do you understand how hot it is here? Like, we were frying. It was humid as all heck. She's like, I get it. I said, take it off. You've got cute little skirt on. You know, it's cute. You look good. It's black. You look fine. Also, she's not that big. I mean, she wasn't big at all, honestly. So I get her to do that. And she goes, she's standing with me like this, with her arms in front of her body, like in front of her stomach. And she goes, Elizabeth, this is what she goes, do I look okay? And I said, I want to be clear. Number 1, never ask that question ever again. Number 2, you always look okay. And number 3, of course you look okay. And she goes, well, and I said, you want to know something? She said, what? I said, close your eyes. So she did. I said, tell me what the people around us are wearing right now. Tell me the color of their bathing suits. I want to know if it's a 2-piece or a 1-piece. And she goes, well, I don't know. And I said, why not? She goes, because I'm not looking. And I went, thank you. No one's looking at you either, kid. Right? Like, and then finally she went out in the water, loved it. For about 20 minutes. And then they were like, okay, we're tired, we're done, we're going home. Glad I invested that $30 because it gave me a moment with her to say, here's what the standards are. They're different in New Jersey than they are in Missouri. In Missouri, if you walked around in a bikini, yeah, people would look at you funny. But doing it on the ocean, on the beach, it's normal, right? This is what Christine was trying to emphasize as well. Just know what the rules are. Know what the expectations are. Know your place. If you're able to understand your place in the context you're in, and you protect your purity/reputation, you will be persuasive. But the first thing you have to do is to make sure that you keep your reputation good. The second thing you need to do is to know your place. And then third, it matters what you say and how you say it. Does that make sense? So if, you know what, you could say anything in the world and have a bad reputation, or be speaking out of turn, and then you wouldn't be heard. You can know your place and speak very poorly, and you won't be heard. So first, your reputation, your purity, whatever. Second, know your place. Third, then you speak. So what did Christine de Pizan demonstrate for us? Well, looking back, I guess, with 2020 vision, we can say a couple of things. Number one, she was a woman who was writing in the medieval period, the late medieval period, but in the medieval period. That's, I guess, a little bit of a feminist, maybe? I mean, I don't really think she would have advocated for it that way, but people sometimes see her that way, talk about her that way, okay? That she is a feminist because she's one of the first writers who was a woman who's, and you know, in fairness, there were a lot. Over the course of 800 years, there were a lot of women writers. However, to be still acknowledged because we still have your work, that's a big deal. Her work got preserved along with the men's, right? And some people would say, okay, well, we studied Christine de Pizan, so look, we're doing the female thing. Back in the 90s, when I was in college, it was like, okay, we're going to study this one woman. Good job. No, that's not how that works. But okay, you know, okay. Now we have many more examples now. But earliest is really Christine de Pizan. The second thing that we learned from Christine de Pizan, some people would argue, and again, I don't know that I'd argue this, but it's 2020 hindsight, organizational communication. Understanding what your role is your first job, right? So whenever we study organizations and how they have internal communication, we study the hierarchy of it. And if you're in a business and there's a hierarchy, you always go to the one above you, right? Or do you just cut all the way to the top? No, you always go to the one above you, right? You go through the proper channels is the way that we word it these days. I don't know what the word is in organizational communication, but that's what we would call it, is proper channels. And finally, the third thing that we get from Christine de Pizan is an acknowledgement that women as speakers, writers, communicators, are different from men. Has anybody seen, I think of it, Brave? Princess Merida?
With the bear?
With the bear, the mom
Yeah.
turns into the bear. The problem with Merida is that she will not acknowledge her job as a princess. Did you notice this? I mean, this takes place around, probably around the time of Christine de Pizan, maybe right before, right? She's supposed to wear that incredibly modest, you know, tight, disgusting outfit. Her hair keeps popping out, right? Because it's unruly. I remember the first time my mother went to Disney, I had never been there. I've been there once in my life, and it was like 5 years ago. She would take all of the grandkids down there, except mine, because they weren't hers yet. But the first time she went down, they had a really good time. She fell in love with Donald Duck. So they went down like 4 more times. And at one of those trips, she calls me up, she goes, man, there was this one princess there, her hair was just all over the place, it was crazy. It was like red, and she looked like dirty, like really frumpy. And I'm like, Mother, you were talking about Merida. You are half Irish, what is wrong with you? Granted, part of that's Scotch. So, you know, she was kind of like, what? And I'm like, okay, you need to see the movie before you judge. Like, sorry, right? Merida had so many things going on with her that were wrong. She didn't speak right, she didn't know her place, she didn't dress appropriately, she had a reputation for being difficult, right? And then she showed up with boys and the young men, excuse me, when she shot her arrow through all of theirs, right? This would have been around the same time that no princess would have done that. None would have done that. If they had, I guess they would have been pretty brave, but also probably put away in a tower somewhere, you know what I mean? Like literally. But the idea that we could break out of what the expectations were for women comes from Christine de Pizan. And that's going to lead to another writer who we're going to study in a week or two, Margaret Fell. And so we'll refer back to Christine de Pizan for that. Questions? It's okay to ask a question. We're only a half hour into the class, so you're still going to get out early. No questions, none at all. Yes, Michael?
If they had a term for feminist at the time, do you think Christine would have identified herself as that?
She probably would not have felt it was her place to do so.
Okay. I just hearing what she said and reading about it, it was kind of she's advocating. I just don't know if it's for the greater good. It's just, I don't know.
It's interesting because the majority of the story that we get in the excerpt that you guys have is from the queen that she was talking to, or the princess. I don't remember who she was talking to specifically, but from the person that she was speaking to is what most of that is. Really, Christine asks a question, and that question is essentially, I'm paraphrasing here, but essentially, why wouldn't men see women as more equal, as better wives, as better partners, as better mothers, if they were educated, as opposed to uneducated? So she's asking a question that I think is at the core and at the heart of a feminist position of, we should be treated equally. Why aren't the expectations the same? Why wouldn't that be a good thing? Why wouldn't educated partners be a good thing, educated women? And the next page and a half is just this woman telling her that men need to be propped up. And so our job is to sit back, advise them, be in our proper place, and prop them up and make them look good. That's our job, essentially. I say our job, not mine. But so if somebody had said, I imagine, I don't know obviously, but I imagine if somebody had said to her, you're really a model for how women should speak out, she would have been like, no, not the point. Point is, don't speak out. That is the point, right? I almost feel like Christine de Pizan was what do they call that? When you want to keep everything copacetic and you're trying to keep everything even keel because you don't want to upset the boat, right? Rock the boat. Most of the time those people are victims of alcoholism or abuse or something like that. Most people who are trying to keep everything copacetic, no matter what the cost, most of the time come from some sort of emotional or physical abuse. And I feel like Christine was coming from that position, I am not going to piss anybody off. On the other hand, she also was the only breadwinner at all in her family structure. So I imagine she had to question, how am I going to make money as a woman? And the answer was, don't piss off the men. Write them poems that they can give to other women, right? And sell them and help women know how to speak to their partners in court, right? And how a woman should behave if she's a courtier in the court to get the king or the prince's attention. The movie I think about the most with this is, I think it's called A Cinderella Story. It's with Drew Barrymore and DeGray Scott. I don't know many people that have seen that movie, but if you've seen that movie, she pretends to be a courtier, the Drew Barrymore character, but she is one. Technically, she comes from a royal line, but her stepmother is treating her like she's not, right, Cinderella? And so, but she has to play the same part, right? Being the humble servant to her stepmother, but then going to court and being a courtier, right? So, I think that gives you a good example, and I think while Christine is asking the feminist question, she's not giving the feminist answer, at least not the way we would see it now. Back then, I would imagine it was more a matter of how do I survive than it was how do I lead the way on the feminist trail, you know?
Yeah.
So it kind of makes me uncomfortable when people talk about her as a feminist. I don't think she'd be okay with that, you know? And that certainly wasn't the time. At the time, no. I mean, now we generally get to speak equally, right? And now it's not a matter of just your sex anymore, it's a matter of your gender and your presentational style and all of those things that might get you ignored or shut out, right, of a position of power. And I mean, I guess that's the last thing I will say about that is that she was commenting on the power structure at the time, on the powers, the power of the social structure and the economic structure, and saying, if you acknowledge where you're at, then you can do more than if you fight against it. She would think Merida was nuts. Any other questions?
What was the first thing that you mentioned about like what we learn from Christine? Because you mentioned like 3 things.
Yeah, I did. You're asking me to recall something I said.
I wrote down the first thing is reputation, maintaining
Yes.
reputation, and then knowing your place, and then the third thing is how you say it. Right.
The study of rhetoric, essentially, yeah. You bet. No point in practicing good rhetoric if you have a bad reputation. Any other questions? Clarifications? Okay, everybody, then on Thursday, we will be coming in, and I believe that we are reading Peter Ramus. And if you were going to read anybody, like I said last week, this is the guy to read. It's fun to read him, at least it was back in my day. I'm going to assume it's still fun to read him. He's kind of a little bit of a rebel too. Yeah, so enjoy it, and I'll see you Thursday. Your exam will go up on Friday of this week, and it will be up for 7 straight days.